Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the World YWCA Young Women Leaders panel. This particular panel, with the theme of gender based violence in the Pacific during the time of COVID 19, has been organized by us in collaboration with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Government of Australia. We welcome you all on behalf of everyone. Uh, this pandemic and the time that we are seeing right now has made us see a number of challenges, from economic development to basic health and well-being. And of what we see, there are going to be long-lasting impacts on the populations across the globe. At World YWCA, we have been closely monitoring, working closely with women, young women, and girls in a number of countries across the world. And one of the core concerns and issues that has come up globally has been the impact on gender based violence. The pandemic, the lockdown, the quarantine, the phases in which we are living right now in different countries has created multiple effects on women, young women, and girls globally. And not only are they more vulnerable right now, living sometimes even stranded in their homes with the violators, facing a lot of domestic violence, but also there is an increasingly evidence of rise in digital violence as well, because everyone is going digital. So GBV and the impact on physical and mental health is something which is very close to the work that YWCA does, but also very close to the agenda of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Government of Australia. So I would like to welcome everyone from all the corners of the world joining us today. We have with us a very strong and very brilliant young woman leader from Papua New Guinea, who works with us as our and coordinates our regional work for the Pacific region, Asia Pacific region. Naomi. Naomi, Naomi is an active member of the YWCA of PNG, but she's also currently coordinating the regional work of World YWCA in Asia Pacific. She's a specialist in co-designing, implementing, and evaluating leadership programs. She believes in strong values of inclusion, innovation, and intersectional feminism. She's somebody who inspires us at the World Office all the time, and she's working and she wants to work continuously to ensure that no one is left behind. We are so proud of having Naomi as the panel, as one of the as our moderators today, and she will take you through the journey of interacting and engaging with our three brilliant panelists, whom she will also introduce. I would like to hand over. Naomi, please take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suchi, for the introductions and the welcome. Talofa, Bula, Kiora, hello through and hello to everyone who has and is joining us from the region and elsewhere in the world. I welcome you all. So for this panel, joining and sharing with us today are some incredible young women in the Pacific. So we have with us in the panel, and introducing our panelists for this panel are from Samoa. We have Fusi Masina Tietie, who is the Principal Coordination, Resourcing and Monitoring Officer for the Ministry of Health in Samoa. She's also the Young Women Vice President for the Young Women's Christian Association in Samoa, and is a co-founder of a young women's online platform called Her Voice. From Papua New Guinea, we have Jeanette Ila, who is a YWCA of Papua New Guinea young women, and she is also the Behavior Change Campaign Advocacy Assistant for UN Women in PNG. From Fiji with us, we have Kalisito Vaeveve, who is a Pacific queer activist feminist and is also an advisory member of the Civicus Diversity Inclusion Action Network. And for our closing remarks for the panel today, we have with us our sister from Australia, Sophie Fisher, who works in the Pacific Security Cooperation at Australia's Office of the Pacific in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And she is also a longtime member of the YWCA and is a board member of the YWCA of Canberra since 2017. Thank you and welcome to our panelists. Now, as part of the Thursdays in Black global campaign, and this happens to be a Thursday, we stand in solidarity wearing black today for all women, young women, and girls in the Pacific and elsewhere in the world that have lost their lives or are survivors of gender-based violence. We also pray for those who are still in abusive and violent relationships, that they find the courage, support, and help that they need to break free. I kindly ask each of us to take a minute of silence to remember them all. Thank you. Now moving along into the best part of the panel, which is the conversation, or as we call it in the Pacific, our talanoa. Now to our young women leaders and our panelists for today's session. In your own perspective and or understanding, what is the status of gender-based violence in the region or in your country? And how has it changed during the lockdown of the COVID pandemic? So we can start from Samoa.
Hello, everyone. So in my own understanding and as a young woman growing up in Samoa, status of gender-based violence in Samoa, but recently the government of Samoa released our second voluntary national review report, or the VNR report, to the high-level political forum, or the HLPF meeting, which was held virtually in July, just last month. And with the second VNR report from Samoa, it was noted gender-based violence as one of the issues that still remains the same from the first report that Samoa did. And from that, the government noted that gender-based violence remains a focus for the government in order to address some of the key gender equality issues around the country. Also with the, as noted in the Samoa Family Safety Studies, it was noted that women experiencing violence between the ages of 20 to 49 increases from 46 to 60%, from 46 to 60%. And while there is some debate on how the figures and how the data were provided, one thing that is clear is there is an increased number of cases reported. Increased number of cases reported, and I know for a fact the increase of the cases being reported may be partly influenced by the increasing awareness and availability of the focused support services available in the country. How has this figure changed during the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, during one of the interventions that the Women's Major Group provided in the HLPF last month, we noted that gender-based violence has become a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19, and that women and girls are forced to shelter in place with abusive partners and some family members. And with this statement, I find it is no different from the context of Samoa. In saying this, we had a meeting today with the Samoa Samoa Red Cross Society, one of an NGO that's doing an amazing job in going to the community here in Samoa during this pandemic. And they noted in their report, their progress report from January to July, that this is one of the major issues that they have come across, and it has increased so much from last year in comparison to the time of the pandemic. And not only that, we hear news about it on the radio and on social media about gender-based violence happening around Samoa. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Masina. Kalis from Fiji, do you have anything to share?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think from Fiji before COVID-19 happened, there was a research by FWRM and Fiji Women Crisis Center that stated that 64% of women have experienced intimate partner violence. And whereas there was also another research was launched last year was by Diva for Equality, that it was on LGBT women, it was on lesbian, bisexual, and trans masculine women, that like 84% of them have experienced have experienced some form of sexual or physical abuse. And with COVID-19, when COVID-19 happened, also Fiji had we were also affected by the tropical cyclone Harold. Whereas, I mean, where there were like reports from the Fiji Women Crisis Center news articles that stated that there were many calls on the National Domestic Violence Helpline, that they have recorded around 527 calls of related to domestic violence and COVID. And to me, that itself, like, it's such a, and I mean, there's been increasing calls that, like, with COVID-19 and when the first case happened in Fiji sometimes in March, also the tropical cyclone Harold also increased, and there was like so many. According to the figures given by the Minister for Women, Mary Steny Winiwanga, that said that 66% of the calls were women and 44 were men. And to me, that's like the gender response, like, I'd say that, like, here's like this COVID-19 situation and the tropical hair like has like exhibited like the gender equality negatively, especially the safety and security of women and girls in Fiji.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kalis, and the data around GBV cases in Fiji. Thank you so much. Jeanette from Papua New Guinea. Hello, is Jeanette still on the line? Jeanette?
Hi, Naomi. Hello.
Yes, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone who's listening online to our discussion right now. Thank you. From my perspective as a young women leader in Papua New Guinea, I believe that women and girls in the Pacific, especially in Papua New Guinea, violence and abuse are part of their daily lives. And currently with the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, domestic violence and sexual violence have drastically increased behind closed doors. With restrictions of movement, social distancing, also financial constraints, a few to name, contributes to increased rate of gender-based violence in Papua New Guinea. And we've seen that this has also contributed to the rise of GBV. For example, recently we had a case, homicide case, I think happened in June, about Janeline Kennedy, a 19-year-old mother of two, was murdered by her partner. And it raised a pressing concern and serious need of action from the government and the people. We also had increased rate of rape. And we're also experiencing, I mean, women and children experiencing who are looking for homes, who are displaced because of fighting, tribal fighting in the highlands. Women are beaten up due to sorcery-related accusations. Also, in the highlands. So with the COVID-19, the violence rate has very much increased for women and girls in Papua New Guinea.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for sharing that perspective from Papua New Guinea and what's been happening. So from the reflections or from the sharing that was shared by these three young women, it seems the case of the situation of gender-based violence in the region has increased to an extent in these most recent times, and even so more during COVID-19. So considering the significant effort and work being done across the region and at country levels to address gender-based violence, what can you say or share about the leadership and the roles that women and young women are playing to address the crisis of GBV?
Hi.
Masina, yes, go ahead.
Hi, Naomi. How I'm seeing women, young women, and not only that, but the youth and young people, playing a role around the crisis of GBV during this pandemic. In Samoa, there has been quite a number of, as I mentioned before, not only youth-led but young women-led initiatives, projects, and organizations, trying so hard to raise awareness on issues around gender-based violence. In saying this, some organizations are focusing on conducting trainings and workshops around the issue. Some organizations I know are providing counseling services to the victims of gender-based violence. Not only that, other organizations I know of are actually having victims or letting the victims share and tell their stories around the issues of gender-based violence. In saying that, the online platform that I'm a part of called Her Voice, through this platform, we have been able to feature and capture and document stories from some of the young women that have gone through and have experienced violence throughout their lifetime. And at the same time, these young women are sharing their experiences, sharing what they have gone through. And I think most importantly, they not only sharing their experiences, they are urging other young women or other people, especially women and young women that might have listened to their stories or like just click on their stories for a read. They're urging these young people and young women that, if you're going through the same issue as us, that, just speak up about it. And I think that's the most important lesson that I got from all these young women who share their journeys on gender-based violence, is their courage to come up and share their stories, and urging people that are going through the same situation to do the same. One issue that I would love to highlight here is around, I know of a lot of young people and young women that are volunteering their time to raise awareness on, like, not just gender-based violence alone, but around all the other issues that are surrounding the young people and young women of Samoa. And seeing these young people, especially young women, volunteering their time around these issues. And you know, it's such a joy, and it's so amazing just to seeing them raising their voice and doing the work without having to expect something in return. And I just wanted to highlight that, you know, because then not, I mean, it's such a joy for me seeing these young women just to be the voice and making a change without having to expect something in return. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masina, for sharing that and for sharing the work that you've been doing with Her Voice. It's very inspiring and encouraging when stories are shared by women who have gone through gender-based violence themselves. So thank you so much for that. Can we hear from Kalis or from Jeanette?
Oh, thank you. I think for young, around gender-based violence, like the advocacy of like young women in Fiji, I think during the crisis, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when there was the lockdown, there was a wonderful young woman, Anna Randuva. Like she did she was doing donation of sanitary pads and like these sanitary kits, and like she's been doing this drive, and like they were like she was calling for donation, and like was so, I would say that was like, I felt very heartwarming to see that people, like a young woman who's in high school, like to do this initiative, and it was like a very, I felt like inspiring. That also there was a Facebook page created on Facebook. They was called Better for Better Fiji, and this was a Facebook platform where where people around people would exchange goods and services, like it was like they would trade groceries for their service. Like to fix a laptop, they would get like these people would like buy groceries for these families because the tourist sector, the industry in Fiji and the other were heavily impacted. Where in Fiji, tourism was like form of economic backbone. When many hotel workers lost their job, this one initiative by these two beautiful young women families, they created this Facebook page where people, and it was like, there was a lot of following where people would barter their services or exchange goods for, there was an article was made by, a piglet was exchanged for a kayak. And like, it was like, to me, like, it totally reflects what the Pacific is. Like, you know, like, even though the world can be, we think that the world is full of unkind people, but with the pandemic has like opened up like this form of us like exchange of goods and services, like dating back to the 1800s, where trade happened. And to me, this initiative by these young women, like I find it very inspiring. Like, you know, and like even though around gender-based violence, there was a online campaign that happened. It was regarding a rape perpetrator, where he was to play rugby, and like, and you see many young women like at tweeting on sharing their stories on Facebook, and like their the amount of signatory from that campaign they got, like instead like questioning the World Rugby Union and the Fiji Rugby Union, like no, why is this perpetrator not even serving a full year sentence in jail? In like not his sentence, not fulfilling his sentence, but yet like that, like people were signing petition against him, like it was successful, which he didn't play. And to me, that's like how young women mobilize, like quite powerful.
Thank you so much, Kalis, for sharing. That's amazing to hear about the young women in Fiji starting the initiative around bartering. Um, that's very lovely, and it's beautiful to see it happening during these difficult times, and to also hear about the mobilizing of the young women and women in Fiji against the rugby player that you just mentioned. Thank you so much. Jeanette, moving to you.
Um, so I'll just share a bit about the work I'm doing as a young woman within the organization that I work with. Seeing that gender-based violence has become a norm in society. And so what I'm doing, like I volunteered with YWCA, and I think I started my foundation journey there with the Rise Up program, volunteering with YWCA back in 2013, 14, 15, 16. And um, the experience from the Rise Up project has really built my confidence and um, inspired me to come out as a young women leader and address issues around GBV and women empowerment and young women's leadership in my society as a young woman. Um, Going back to a lot of issues of GBV being normalized in society, the campaign I lead with UN Women is called Sun Up One Time campaign or Stand Together campaign. So we advocate. I mean, that is one of the powerful platform that use being advocate, being vocal about the issues. So I talk about changing behaviors and mindset of people around us, especially to respect women, to treat them with dignity and with fairness. And because a lot of issues around GBV starts with behavior. So we want to change behavior, we want to change attitudes to respect women and treat them as equal. In one of the UN Women report states that 90% 90% reported experiencing sexual harassment in public spaces or when using public transportation. And that really speaks how dangerous public spaces are for women or for young women to access in a city. So as a young women leader, advocating on changing behaviors and mindset helps, is a platform that we can help, we can, speak confidently to change mindsets and behaviors so that women are treated equally, women are respected in society, and women, it limits any form of GBV that is experienced by women.
Thank you so much, Jinty, for sharing about the work that you're doing with the UN Women in PNG around behavioral change, and also for making mention of our Rise Up Young Women's Leadership Program that is supported and funded by the DFAT of Australia. So thank you so much for mentioning that. So to our next question, as young women leaders who are leading in your own spaces and in your own communities and countries, what are your thoughts and reflections on how young women are leading during the time of the pandemic in your perspective, in your respective countries and as a whole in the region? What's your reflection or thoughts around that?
Thank you, Naomi. In Samoa, generally speaking, young women leadership during COVID, during this pandemic, has been tremendous, has been so admirable from my own stance. In saying this, as a young person working in the health sector in Samoa, I have come across and have seen young women, so many young women leading most of the units within the health sector that are working together in combating the current crisis. And with these young women I've seen working at the health sector, despite having to work unusual hours, and despite having unusual workloads, and I'm not just speaking about the doctors and the nurses that are working in the health sector, but all other professions working in the health sector. These young women, despite all that they go through every day, they still show up, even if we're called in to take the 12 a.m. shift or the 10 p.m. shift, they still show up. And not only that, despite all the hassle and all the workload that we're going through, they still get the job done. And it's so admirable because most of the job that have been added onto us and all these other young women are not even within our JD or terms of reference and our caliber. But, it's so amazing how just seeing these young women doing the job. And outside of the health sector, we've worked with so many young women in the other support services, such whether they're working from the finance sector or from the audit, the Attorney General's office. These young people and young women are working tirelessly to cater for the need of the health sector during this pandemic, not only for the health sector alone, but the whole country. And then we have the young people and young women working at the NGOs and the private sectors. There are young people and young women who has generously assisted and offered to assist families that are suffered from COVID-19. Most probably some of these families, the breadwinner of this family might have lost his or her job during this pandemic. And these amazing organizations are assisting these families in providing food and all the basic supplies that we need for our daily lives. To me, overall, young women leadership during COVID-19 is admirable. At the same time, for me personally, it has shifted my focus and my priorities on my volunteer work and my work around young women. As during the pandemic, I'm now, you can't do this. Like all my time is now focused on my full-time job, which is at the Ministry of Health, and leaving some part of some of the work that I was planning to do. And I'm not complaining, but it's, overall, young women leadership in Samoa during this pandemic has been very admirable.
Thank you so much, Messina, for that and for sharing the amazing work young women are taking as frontliners in Samoa, not for themselves, but also for their families and for those around them. So thank you for sharing that. To Khalees or Jeanette.
I think my reflection of like young women leadership here in Fiji, I've seen that many young women young women leaders have been showing, like displaying resilience, like because we were fighting, we faced the COVID in the Pacific, or also in Fiji, where where we are so prone to tropical cyclones, and Fiji itself, like we was a category 4, and despite the COVID-19 and the tropical cyclone, and there's like I've seen a lot of young women being so resilient, in the Pacific, and I've seen like the work of like NGOs, civil society organization here in Fiji have been doing so much work with collaboration with the Ministry of Women, Poverty Alleviation. Like we've done so much work in the with this, and like I started when it comes to funding, is that we have seen the world progress with gender equality, like yet in the Pacific only 1% of funding is given to the Pacific, and I find that for funding agency, like you really need to, like when it comes to funding the Pacific, make sure that funding is like very flexible, because sometimes most of this funding is just project funds. So they only a certain period of time, a certain period where these funds are to be used, like without recognizing like the multiple challenges that we in the Pacific go through, like in terms, like this COVID-19 was seen as we come out of a surprise. Like, and I find that many young I think in terms of like my reflections, like there's so much young women, like young women with disabilities that like will leaders have like displayed a lot of resilience, and to me that is something that I treasure. Like We need to see the multiple layers that women have to be at the front line of every disaster. And I listen to their stories, and you know, like we really need to look from a intersectional perspective lens and see that like funding, that this funding has to be gone to like of young women.
Right. Thank you so much, Khalis, for sharing that and for highlighting some very important things about young women. The resilience of young women most definitely has come out in full during these pandemic times, and also the need for more resourcing, as you've mentioned, for them to do more. Thank you so much for highlighting that, Khalis. Jeanette?
Yes, I think I'll add on to Kali what he has mentioned about resilient. I've seen how young women have that passion and that desire to make change happen, to create change happen within their society, within their communities. And during this pandemic, I've seen women coming out to do advocacy programs around, in terms of preventing COVID-19. For example, through my organizations have been doing COVID-19 awareness in the markets, and going down to the community level or to the vulnerable groups, and advocating on how to, giving them the information on how to, what COVID-19 is, and some of the safe and hygiene who selling food crops also need to, know how to protect themselves when they are at the market. So doing awareness, being vocal during this pandemic was helpful to see women appreciating the knowledge, appreciating the information. And I had a couple of vendors, women vendors, who volunteered to assist me and deliver the informations in the market vocally. And these are vendors at the market. And it was really good to see women coming out and trying to help the people, trying to help other women, other men in their communities during this pandemic. And also young people, young men and young women who are being very open to the crisis and trying to, contribute in some way to help prevent the given prevention measures on the spread of COVID-19. And for my reflection, like I've seen women coming out, like comparing from the past, like women hold back and women were not confident, but to see now women coming out, like I've seen some women out there at the bus stops with loud hailers talking about, people wearing masks, practicing social distancing. And it was very interesting to see young women, because a lot, I feel like during this lockdown has also created a lot of fear, a lot of criminal activities has increased as well. But the courage and the strength that I've seen in young women coming out into public places to talk about COVID-19, how to prevent it, was very encouraging during this pandemic times.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeanette, for sharing that and the work that once again you're doing, working with market vendors, the women market vendors and other young women in PNG during these very difficult times. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you to our panelists for the conversation that we just had. So I would like to now invite Sophie from DFED, Sophie, who's representing DFED and the YWCA of Canberra, to join us to make her final remarks and reflections on the panel. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Naomi. What an amazing panel. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today, wherever we are. For us in Canberra, that's the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, especially young women. Firstly, I'd like to thank World YWCA and local YWCAs across the region for the ongoing work that they're doing to really highlight the key issues and ideas of young women. As a young Y woman myself, I'm just really proud to be part of a movement that, oh, I've lost you. There you go. I'm very proud to be part of a movement that's creating spaces for young women to lead transformative change. I'd like to thank our panelists, Messina, Jeanette, Khalees, expertly moderated by you, Naomi, just for being so frank and bold and poignant in your contributions. It's been such an interesting conversation, and certainly I've got a lot to think about, and I think everyone who's here would agree with me to take away. I was particularly struck by a few key threads that came through from all of the panelists. One was the importance of a collaborative approach to address gender-based violence with roles for government, civil society, local community and church leaders and international partners. The need to incorporate intersectionality and inclusivity into gender and leadership work in the region to make sure that we're not leaving any women behind. And really just a call to action to keep enabling and building the capacity of both our current and our future young women leaders, because they are everywhere in the region and they're already doing really amazing things in their communities. And I guess on that note, we are really proud to see participants and alumni of the Rise Up program here contributing to such interesting, insightful conversations on important issues. As many of you would be aware, the recent Monash University evaluation found that young women are using the skills and the knowledge that they've acquired through the program to really better access and advocate for their rights. They talked about improved confidence, self-esteem, and a really incredible 95% said that they would take those skills and knowledge that they acquired through the program back into their communities and into their work lives. And I think that this panel is a real testament to that, and a testament to the role that Rise Up can play in the leadership journeys of young women in the region. And all of you, the panelists, you're leaders not just in your communities, but you're leaders of our region more broadly. And it's just great that we can utilise this space created by Worldwide to share first-hand observations, experiences, to hear about really incredible projects and initiatives being led by young women, and to hear about the resilience that young women have in the face of challenges. We know that violence against women and girls is a significant issue at any time, but particularly so now in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a challenge that we face here in Australia too, and it's just critical that we can come together to learn from one another and really work together collectively to try and affect positive change. So thank you again to Worldwide, to local YWCAs, to my Y sisters, both on the panel and abroad in the region and globally, and to everyone else who joined in today to join us in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for sharing that. I mean, we truly believe in the power of young women. We believe, as the movement believes truly, that in order for us to make positive change happen, the first step is listening to the voices of young women. And that forms the very basis of how we work, how we function, how we design our programs, how we operate, how the programs are run by these brilliant young women, most of whom today are on our panel representing the region. So thank you so much, Sophie, and you are one of those young women for us. We already have the Q&A round open. So we have a Q&A chat pod where people can list the questions they have. We have another 9 minutes for the panel. So if you have any question, please put it in the Q&A chat pod, not in the normal chat pod. We already have one question live. And so the process I'll follow is I'll be reading out the question, and if any panelist wants to share their response, they are most welcome to jump on in. We already have a first question from David Lawrence. And the question is, were young women in leaders involved in the committees of planning and implementing the COVID-19 response? And were the actions women focused with special consideration to GBV response during the pandemic? So in your country, in the region, specifically, I feel in the countries that each of you represent, do you think, and Naomi, please feel free to also share your understanding of this. Do you think that young women leaders were involved in the committees, and was GBV a part of that agenda?
Hi, Sochi, it's Masina. Maybe I can share my.
Yes, please go ahead.
Um, as my role as a young woman working in the health sector here in Samoa, we currently have the the pandemic response plan in draft currently, and I was fortunate to be part of the committee or the team in trying to put this pandemic plan together. It's currently in draft, and at the moment we are looking into providing consultations not only to the other government ministries but the NGOs and the community as well. So that process will be conducted in the weeks to come. So and yes, definitely, GPV is one of the key issues that's been pushed by our teams who are conducting the community works. So yes, the issue of GPV is considered, but I am so looking forward in the coming weeks where this dialogue around how the plan will go about will be talked about. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Messina. That was interesting to know. At World YWCA, we are also trying to advocate together with the Big Six, the youth organizations, to talk about how young people have to be involved in designing issues, the agendas for specific issues, and all of them, not just GBV, but education, employment, volunteering. So it's interesting to know that that is already happening in Samoa. Anyone else wants to answer the question?
Hello.
Yes, Jeanette, go ahead.
Yes, I think from PNG, I don't think we had a lot of voices from young women who were part of the committee for COVID-19, who raised voices regarding the increase of GBV, and I don't think we had young women on that committee to really talk about the rise in GBV that increased, but during the first lockdown in Papua New Guinea, I think with the case of Jenna Lynn that happened, raised a lot of concerns around GBV, and it really took the government's attention, and there were protests happening, which young people led to the parliament to petition the government to take action around GBV in PNG.
Thank you, Jeanette. I think one of the participants has also reflected on that reality, and it's interesting to know the different kind of approaches that different countries in the Pacific are having. This is great. We have another question, and I'm mindful that we have 4 minutes, so I would raise the other question, which is by Jill Onami, asking what has been the situation in regard to access to reproductive health and rights and mental health information during in the Pacific during the pandemic, and what efforts have been put in place to protect especially young women on SGBV during this pandemic. So if anyone wants to go take a lead and answer that question. I'm going to repeat the question once again for all the panelists. What has been the situation in regard to the access to reproductive rights and mental health during the pandemic? Khalees or anyone, do you want to take lead in answering the question?
Sure, Satchu. I think I would speak in behalf of PG. So in PG, there's for around mental health and for counseling. So we have like helplines available. So there's a national helpline, the National Domestic Violence Helpline, which is we have it available, and we also have the Lifeline, which is a mental health and suicide prevention helpline, and it has been having calls in regards of like mental health during COVID-19, and we also have the child helpline for children in regards to violence, regarding to all forms of violence, and with around on sexual reproductive health, there's also like during the pandemic, there's a wonderful NGO in Fiji called Medical MSP, Medical Service Specific, that which is around that works around like counseling and also sexual reproductive SRHR with young women. And I mean, as in available, I think during COVID-19 there was like with the increasing domestic gender-based violence, like with the partners, like the police were not cooperating. Where I think where the victim, most of the survivors or the victim, young women, were trying to access the services or to flee from their homes. They couldn't because of the police not cooperating. And like during curfew hours, it was from 10 till 5. But even though, but there's there's like certain essential services were available.
Thank you, Khalees. Anyone else? Messina, Jeanette, this is one of the questions. We actually have another question from Maria. I think I'll try to point that out given we have just a few minutes left. What can young women do to ensure that their voices are heard on a national level, when most of the time experiences of older people are favored over the voices of the young? It's a brilliant question. I mean, one of the questions we always challenge, and as an intergenerational movement, we are working very strongly towards this, on how to make sure that young women voices are heard. And thank you, Maria, for asking this. This is one of the particular reasons this panel is being held with young women leaders. Anyone wants to go for this question that Maria has asked? How can young women ensure that their voices are heard when every time the experiences of older people are favored? Naomi, do you want to close with this session and give your reflections on this question? It's a very interesting question, and I'm sure you have great to say.
Thank you, Suchi, for that. And thank you so much, Maria, for the question that you have raised. It's a very interesting question and a very difficult one in the perspective of us being a specific young woman, where we have been told most of the times in our lives to respect our elders. So it is a challenge working in this space, especially with older people that have more experience than us. But I think for young people, the best thing to do is to make sure that you are seen in all those spaces. Make yourself visible in those spaces. Find opportunities that will allow for that visibility that young people need in those spaces. And then you can be heard there. So it's very challenging, as I've mentioned, because as a young woman in the Pacific, it's hard to get into those spaces where you have older men and older women there, and you are told that you are young and inexperienced. But again, as I've said, for a young person to be heard, get into those spaces, make them see you and make them feel your presence in those spaces. And then they can give you space to be heard in those spaces. That would be my reflection or my response to that question from Maria. So in closing this panel discussion, we've had a very wonderful conversation, a good time together with the questions and the responses from the panelists themselves. So on behalf of the YWCA and everyone that has joined, a very big Pafetai Lava, Vinaka Vakalevu, thank you through, and thank you to our panelists for the Talanoa that we just had, to DFET for your continuous support and collaboration with the World YWCA towards empowering and supporting young women of the Pacific. And last but not least, to everyone, thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. Take care, stay safe, and remember, say no to GBV.
Thank you, Naomi. I just want to make sure that I end up with thanking everyone, including those who are attending, because it's we know the climate issues and the weather issues that are going on in the Pacific right now. And despite the internet connectivity, I am so glad that you could all join. And we had switch on and switch off of videos. That was deliberate. So I am so glad. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you all those attending from World YWCA. It's been a pleasure having you. And we look forward to, this is the Young Women Leaders panel is hosted every month. So we look forward to the next one in September, which is going to be for a different region, but on issues and voices of young women leaders. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.